So New England and Connecticut, that's got a chock full of history with wrestling too. Tell me about how you got interested in professional wrestling.
Well, that's an easy story. In New York, where I'm from, my grandfather used to, take me to get my hair cut. I was about 8 years old. And we'd always go to this one barber shop. And, I mean, we're going back to what I was born in the 60s, the early 60s. So we're going back a long ways. I'm not quite as young as you, my friend. Um,
Yeah.
but I'd get my hair cut, and they always had this little 20-inch black and white TV playing where you watch it, and they're always playing wrestling. And I used to watch Butcher Rashawn, Mad Dog Prowler, people like that. And I've always wanted to be a professional wrestler from that point on. Growing up as a kid in my teens, 11, 12, 13, we moved to Florida, of course. And, Gordon Soley had a group, Championship Wrestling from Florida. And it came on WTBS between 12 and 1 o'clock. And all my friends always wanted to go play football, blah, blah, blah. And I told them they had to wait. Why do you got to wait till 1 o'clock? Because I can't miss Gordon Soley's professional wrestling. So I'd sit there, I'd watch the wrestling, and, of course, then I'd go, play football. But at a young age, I used to practice all the moves on my younger brother, who actually took the brunt of it. And next thing you know, what was I? I was playing semi-pro football in Tampa Bay for the Tampa Bay Scorpions. I was 17, I played for 2 years. And at the age of 18, I met this guy by the name of Ozell Harris. I'll never forget him. He was training to be a professional wrestler by the great Malenko in Tampa, Florida. So I says, well, I'd like to meet him. So he took me one Thursday, the following Thursday, actually, to meet Boris. His real name is Larry. But anyway, I met him, and he started training me. And literally 6 months later, I'm working, outlaw circuit for him in places like Plant City, Florida, Waimama, Bahamas, going up against people like Tyree Pride, God rest his soul, people like that. Bob Roop, um, Louis Estea, Raul Mata, um, Batman. I mean, all those people. Big Vern Henderson, who big boy. He was lineman for the Green Bay Packers, but Malenko was training him. We had a lot of people in our training class, pretty good names like Chris Champion. Chris Champion was training with me at Malenko's school. Chris Champions has since passed away, but he made a big name for himself down here in Florida. His brother, Mark Smith, but went by Mark Starr, who's also passed away, also made a pretty big name for himself, and people like that. But that started my career. Literally, I hooked up with a guy named Mike Jackson, who right now is in his mid 80s, and he's still wrestling out of Alabama. He called me the other day. But anyway, I hooked up with his group, and he would take wrestlers, him and Randy Barber, would take wrestlers from Florida, between Florida, Bill Watts' territory, UWF Mid-South, the Crockett's in Atlanta, and stuff like that. And, we would do jobs, back then it was called jobbers. Nowadays, I guess you call it enhancement talent. You call it whatever you want. You're still a jobber. But to make a long story short, I want to say the third time I went up to Bill Watts' territory, which was like maybe 4 weeks later, Bill Watts bought my contract, and that started my career in the territories as an underneath full-time wrestler. So, yeah, and that was in 1983. So I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, what a great story. Seems like you were able to make that transition and
And,
it took a
and we were
while to.
also one place I forgot to mention. We were also doing Southeastern Continental for Ron and Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden. We'd wrestle out of Batwell Auditorium, and I worked a lot of local shows there for them as well during that Mike Jackson movement before I actually hit the territories full time.
Yeah, definitely seems like in those days I mean, of course, it's always been hard, but definitely seems like it was harder back then to really break into the wrestling business.
Problem with it back then, it wasn't, it was nepotism. Okay, if you were a family member, I'll give you an example. Blackjack Mulligan's son Barry Windham. Obviously, he was a wrestler and a good wrestler. But he also had Barry had a younger brother named Kendall Windham. And because he couldn't wrestle worth the crap back then, he had just started. He was skin and bones, and trust me, I had to wrestle him in Tampa, Florida. So he became a decent wrestler, but in the beginning, he was he was mediocre. He wasn't his brother or his father, but he did become good after a while. But because his name was Mulligan, um, there you go. His father was a big name in the business. So yeah, it was harder to break in. You really had to pay your dues back in those days. And I'll never forget, I bugged Wahoo McDaniel, who was the booker for Mike Graham's group, Gordon Soley out of Florida. I bugged him for about 5, 6 months straight at Miami Beach Convention Center every time they came down there to give me a shot, give me a shot, give me a shot. Well, finally, one day down there, he says, "Okay, kids, you want a shot? Come up to Tampa, Florida to the Sportatorium on Tuesday where we do our TV taping, and I'll give you a shot." Well, I did that. I went up there. And now the way they did it back then is they taped 2 weeks in one day, two week shows. So the first show, he put me up against Billy Jack Haynes. It's a name that most people should remember. But anyway, uh, I got in the ring with him. We had a very good match. It was a decent match. Obviously, he went over. And for those younger guys that don't know what going over means, that means you're winning. We don't never use the term you're winning and losing. It was going over or going under. Nowadays, everything has changed with the terminology. I was trained wrestling taught by uh, Bob the Bullet Armstrong and Brad Armstrong back in the 80s, which they don't use anymore. But us old timers, we still use it. We're still a little bit of what we call kayfabe, even though the business has been, you know, infiltrated. We still, the old timers, consider kayfabe a religion to us. Put me up against Billy Jack Haynes. We had a really good match. We get into the locker room, and Billy sits next to me, and he puts his arm around me. He says, "I just want you to know something." And again, I was green as you could be. He says, "Wahoo put you up against me because I'm the policeman of the group. And if any of y'all don't know what policeman is, they're the ones that the promoters put you up against if they want to hurt you and put you out of the business." Hence Steve Austin for WWF back in the day. All right. So he was the policeman there. And he said, "Wahoo wanted me to hurt you, to discourage you, to put you out of the business." So I said to Billy, I says, "Well, why didn't you?" He says, "Because when we locked up collar and elbow when the bell rang, you were very loose, and I wanted to give you a chance because you felt good. Um, wrestling, you got to be loose. If you're tight, you're called a crowbar. Anything, well, I don't know what they call it now, but back then it was a crowbar, and you got to expect a potato. A potato is a slip up where you actually hit somebody by accident or whatever. Um, so he says, I wanted to give you a shot. He says, "I'm going to take some heat from Wahoo, but stick with it. You're good, kid. Keep working on it."